Tonight, I have a strange and disturbing story for you. A story about a road, a wrong turn, and a town that apparently doesn't exist. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. This story begins with a man named Daniel. Daniel worked as a delivery driver, transporting packages between warehouses at night. He had been doing this job for years and knew the roads extremely well. But one night in late October, everything changed. Shortly after midnight, Daniel was driving through an isolated rural area when he discovered that the highway ahead had been closed because of an accident. His GPS suggested another route. It would take longer, but Daniel had no other choice. He turned onto a narrow road leading through a dark forest. For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual happened. Then his GPS suddenly lost connection. Daniel continued driving until he reached a crossroads. There were no signs, and he didn't remember seeing the intersection on the map. He checked his phone. No signal. Daniel was about to turn around when he noticed lights in the distance. A small town was visible beyond the trees. He decided to drive toward it and ask someone for directions. But as soon as he entered the town, something felt wrong. The buildings looked old. The cars parked along the streets appeared to be from the 1960s or 1970s. There were no modern advertisements, no cameras, and no signs of modern technology. Several people were outside, and every one of them stopped what they were doing when Daniel's van appeared. They simply watched him. Daniel continued until he found a small gas station. He parked and went inside. An older man was standing behind the counter. Daniel asked him the name of the town. The man didn't answer. Instead, he looked outside at Daniel's van and asked, "Where did you come from?" Daniel told him. The man's expression immediately changed. "You shouldn't have taken this road," he said. Daniel asked how to return to the highway. The man pointed toward the door. "Go back the way you came. Don't stop. Don't speak to anyone. Just leave." Daniel thought the man was joking. Then he looked outside. Several people were standing around his van. They weren't touching it. They were looking through the windows. Daniel quickly left the gas station. The people moved away as he approached. He climbed inside and locked the doors. Suddenly, someone knocked on the passenger window. A young woman was standing there. She looked terrified. Daniel tried to ignore her, but she knocked again. Then she said, "Please take me with you." Before Daniel could react, the gas station owner ran outside. He shouted something at the woman, and she stepped away from the van. Then the owner looked directly at Daniel and screamed, "Go." Daniel started the engine and drove away. As he passed through the town, more people appeared. Dozens of them stood silently along the street, watching him leave. Daniel drove through the forest for about 15 minutes. Then his GPS suddenly started working again. But something was impossible. According to the map, he was back on the original highway. Only a few kilometers from where he had started the detour. Daniel stopped and looked behind him. There was no road. No intersection. Only trees. The next morning, Daniel began searching for the town. He checked online maps, old maps, and historical records. He found nothing. There was no town in that area. Several days later, he returned during daylight. Again, he found only forest. Eventually, Daniel convinced himself that exhaustion had caused him to imagine the entire experience. Months passed. Then, one evening, his phone rang. The number was unknown. Daniel answered. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then he heard a woman's voice. Quiet and distant. She said, "Why didn't you take me with you?" Daniel immediately ended the call. But when he checked his phone, something was wrong. There was no record of the call. After that night, Daniel stopped working as a delivery driver. Years later, he reportedly returned to the forest one final time. He never found the town. But on one of the trees near the road, he discovered 3 words carved into the wood: "You came back." Daniel never returned again. So what happened that night? Did exhaustion cause him to hallucinate everything? Did he discover an isolated town forgotten by the outside world? Or did that road lead somewhere it was never supposed to lead? Daniel says there is one thing he remembers more clearly than anything else: the face of the young woman beside his van. Because she wasn't afraid of Daniel. She was afraid of staying there. Maybe Daniel's story was nothing more than exhaustion. A tired mind, an unfamiliar road, and a memory that changed over time. That would be the easiest explanation. But strange places are not always found by taking a wrong turn. Sometimes, they find you first. And the next story begins not with a road, but with a radio signal that no one was supposed to hear. In 2017, a university student named Michael moved into an old house that had belonged to his grandfather. The house was isolated, with no close neighbors and the nearest town almost 20 minutes away. For the first few weeks, nothing unusual happened. Then Michael found an old radio in the basement. He remembered it from childhood. His grandfather used to sit beside it late at night, listening quietly. Whenever Michael asked what he was listening to, his grandfather always gave the same answer: nothing important. Michael carried the radio upstairs. Surprisingly, it still worked. Most frequencies produced only static. But shortly after midnight, Michael discovered something strange. At exactly 12:17 a.m., a woman's voice appeared through the static. She was reading numbers: 4, 9, 2, 7, 11. The broadcast continued for several minutes and then disappeared. Michael assumed it was some kind of old numbers station, perhaps once used to send coded messages. The following night, he waited. At exactly 12:17, the signal returned. The same woman. The same calm voice. More numbers. For several nights, Michael listened and recorded the broadcasts. Then, on the 6th night, something changed. The woman stopped reading numbers. There was a moment of static. Then she said, "Michael." He froze. The radio went silent. Michael told himself he had misunderstood. Maybe it was just part of the code. But the next night, the voice returned. "Michael, can you hear me?" He immediately switched off the radio. The next morning, Michael searched through his grandfather's belongings. Inside a locked drawer, he found several notebooks filled with numbers, dates, and times. Almost every entry had been written at 12:17 a.m. on the final page. His grandfather had written only one sentence: "She knows when you're listening." Michael carried the radio back into the basement and covered it with an old blanket. For several days, nothing happened. Then one night, he woke up at exactly 12:17. A quiet voice was coming from downstairs. The radio was playing by itself. Michael stood at the top of the basement stairs and listened. The woman's voice was repeating the same sentence: "Come downstairs, Michael." Again. And again. Then the voice suddenly stopped. For several seconds, the house was completely silent. And then, someone knocked on the basement door. From the other side. Michael ran outside, got into his car, and spent the night at a friend's apartment. The next morning, they returned together. The basement was empty. The radio was still sitting exactly where Michael had left it. But the basement door was covered in deep scratches. All of them were on the inside. Michael decided to get rid of the radio. He drove several kilometers away and left it inside a garbage container. That night, he returned home. Everything seemed normal. Until 12:17 a.m. Michael woke up to the sound of static. The radio was sitting on the floor beside his bed. He left the house that night and never slept there again. Several months later, the property was sold. Years passed. Then Michael received a message on social media from a man he didn't know. The message contained a simple question: "Did your grandfather own a radio?" Michael didn't respond. Then another message arrived. "I think it's talking about you." Attached was an audio recording. Michael listened only once. First, there was static. Then numbers. And finally, the familiar voice of the woman. Michael left. A long pause followed. Then she continued. "But you're still here." Michael tried to contact the man who had sent the recording. The account no longer existed. He never heard from him again. To this day, Michael claims he doesn't know what the radio was. Maybe the broadcasts were coded transmissions. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. But that doesn't explain how the voice knew his name. It doesn't explain his grandfather's notebooks. And it doesn't explain how a radio abandoned kilometers away appeared beside his bed. Perhaps some signals are not meant to be understood. And if you ever hear a voice speaking through the static, make sure it isn't speaking to you. On that note, the video has come to an end. If you enjoyed the stories, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd appreciate your support. See you next time.